I don't believe, though, that there's any character on television with whom the public identifies more than this Horst character that you play. Do you have much trouble separating Dan Blocker from Horst Cartwright?
Well, not anymore.
Followers who grew up watching the gentle giant Dan Blocker on television were shocked when the story of his final days began to surface years later. On screen, he looked strong, warm, and almost larger than life. But behind the fame and laughter, a heartbreaking ending was quietly unfolding. His sudden death stunned fans and left his family facing deep loss. And the tragedy did not stop there. What happened in Dan Blocker's final days? And how did this painful chapter affect the woman who stood beside him through everything? Dan Blocker, Korean War. In the closing months of 1950, the life of Dan Blocker took a dramatic turn. Like many young American men of that time, he was drafted into the United States Army during the difficult years of the Korean War. The war was already raging, and thousands of young soldiers were being sent far from home to fight in a harsh and dangerous land. Blocker first went through basic training at Fort Polk. There, new recruits faced long days filled with marching, drills, weapons training, and exhausting physical exercises designed to turn ordinary civilians into disciplined soldiers. After finishing this tough training, Blocker was sent overseas to Sapporo in Japan, where he spent 9 months continuing his preparation for war. Everyone knew that the next stop after this training would most likely be the battlefield. Eventually, Blocker was sent into the war zone in South Korea. There, he served with Company F, 1st Battalion, 179 Infantry Regiment of the 45 Infantry Division. Life on the front lines was exhausting and dangerous. Soldiers had to stay alert day and night, never knowing when the next attack might come. Through hard work, courage, and leadership, Blocker earned the respect of the men around him and eventually rose to the rank of sergeant. His unit was stationed near the Jamestown line, close to a place called Chwan, an area that today lies inside North Korea. This region was one of the most dangerous parts of the war. In March 1952, Blocker and his fellow soldiers were pulled into heavy fighting at a position known as Outpost Erie. The battles there were intense, with artillery shells, machine guns, and constant enemy pressure. Then, on May 25, 1952, Blocker's patrol walked straight into a deadly communist ambush deep behind enemy lines. The situation quickly became desperate. The American soldiers were outnumbered and surrounded, with enemy fire coming from several directions. Instead of retreating, they stood their ground and fought back. During the chaos, one American soldier was badly wounded and trapped under heavy enemy fire. Blocker refused to abandon him. For more than 4 hours, he held his position, firing back at enemy machine guns, mortars, and rifles. Bullets and explosions filled the air, but Blocker kept shooting and defending the position, determined to protect his fellow soldiers. His bravery helped keep the enemy forces away and prevented them from overrunning the position. Sadly, the wounded soldier did not survive, but Blocker's actions helped protect the rest of the patrol and gave them a chance to escape the deadly trap. From mid-June 1952 through the end of June 1952, Blocker's unit took part in fierce battles at several dangerous locations, including Erie, Old Baldy, and the famous Pork Chop Hill. After those brutal engagements, they were also tasked with defending Hill 223, another heavily contested position. By the time July 1952 arrived, the men of the division had spent 209 straight days on the front lines. They were exhausted from months of constant danger, sleepless nights, and relentless combat. His bravery did not go unnoticed. Blocker was credited with helping save the lives of several soldiers in his unit. After recovering from his injuries, he was finally sent home in August 1952. So, how did his career start? Did he face challenges? Let's find out. Dan Blocker's acting journey. Slowly, things began to change during the mid-1950s. To earn a little extra money, Blocker started auditioning for small roles on television. At the time, westerns were extremely popular, and television networks were constantly producing new shows set in the Old West. With his towering size, deep voice, and powerful presence, Blocker was a natural fit for these roles. He began landing small parts one after another, gradually gaining experience and confidence in front of the camera. Around this time, famous director Stanley Kubrick even tried to cast him in the film Dr. Strangelove after Peter Sellers backed out of playing the character Major T.J. King Kong. Unfortunately, Blocker's agent turned down the script, and the role eventually went to Slim Pickens. In 1957, Dan Blocker appeared in a short comedy film with the Three Stooges called Outer Space Jitters. In the film, he played a strange character known as the Goon, and he was credited under the name Don Blocker. That same year, he also appeared briefly as a bartender in an episode of the television show Sheriff of Cochise. Something important happened during that time. Being back on a film set again, stepping into different characters, reminded him how much he truly loved acting. It felt natural to him. Soon, more opportunities began to appear, and the work started coming regularly. Before long, he began appearing in some of the most popular television shows of the time. These included Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Have Gun, Will Travel, and Maverick. In several of these roles, he even showed off a natural talent for comedy. His timing was perfect, and audiences quickly noticed. In 1958, he also appeared in an episode of Zorro. Around the same time, he landed a regular role on a television series called Cimarron City. Unfortunately, the show did not last very long. At the time, it probably felt like another disappointment in his career. But in reality, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. When the show was canceled, it freed him to accept a new opportunity, one that would completely change his life. Producer David Dortort chose him to play Hoss Cartwright on the Western television series Bonanza. From that moment on, everything changed for Dan Blocker. To focus fully on acting, he put his doctoral studies on hold. The role required all his time and energy, but the decision turned out to be worth it. On the show, if Little Joe was the charming heartthrob, then Hoss Cartwright was the emotional center of the story. Hoss was the warm, steady presence who held the Cartwright family together. His kindness and loyalty made him the true heartbeat of the show. Interestingly, Bonanza was not an immediate success. When it first aired, the ratings were very low. In fact, the network NBC seriously considered canceling the show after only one season. One major problem was the time slot. The show aired on Saturday nights, where it had to compete with the extremely popular series Perry Mason. During its first year, Bonanza did not even make it into the top 30 television shows. Still, the network believed the show had potential. So they made a bold decision. They moved Bonanza to Sunday nights at 9 p.m. That decision changed everything. Suddenly, more people began watching. The audience grew larger every week, and the ratings started to climb quickly. Soon, the show began a long and successful run that would last 13 more seasons. Another boost came when the company Chevrolet became a sponsor during the second season. Their support helped bring even more attention to the show. Even so, Bonanza nearly disappeared before it ever had a chance to succeed. The show was very expensive to produce, especially because it was filmed in color. Later, NBC executive Thomas Sarnoff revealed that the network in New York had actually planned to cancel the show after its first 13 episodes because it had gone over budget. At that time, producing Bonanza in color cost around $15,000 per episode, which was an enormous amount of money for television in those days. Sarnoff stepped in and made an important promise. He told the network that he could keep the production within budget, and he kept his word. Because of that decision, Bonanza survived. Soon afterward, it exploded in popularity and became one of the most beloved television shows in history, with Dan Blocker's Hoss Cartwright right at the center of it all. What was his link with Hoss? Was he and Hoss the same person? Let's take a closer look. Blocker's connection to Hoss. Early in the run of Bonanza, Dan Blocker struggled with how deeply he was becoming his character, Hoss Cartwright. As he later admitted, during the first few seasons, he often felt as if he and Hoss were the same person. He spent so much time shaping Hoss, learning how he thought, and imagining how he would act that the lines between actor and character began to blur. It wasn't until around the 5th season that Blocker finally felt confident enough to separate himself from Hoss. Once he truly understood who Hoss was, he could step into the role each morning and step out of it each night, leaving Hoss behind on the set. Yet, Hoss never fully left him. He lived quietly inside Blocker, guiding his thoughts and feelings. Blocker drew inspiration from a quote by the 18th-century Quaker missionary Stephen Grellet: "If there is any kindness to show or any good to do it now, because we only pass this way once." This simple idea became the heart of Hoss Cartwright. Every kind gesture, every awkward apology, and every act of loyalty came from that philosophy. Off-camera, Blocker's toughness showed in surprising ways. During one filming session, he was thrown violently from a horse and fractured his collarbone. Instead of going straight to the hospital, he did something remarkable. He set the bone himself, then got back on the horse and finished the scene. Only afterward did he take time to recover. Ironically, during his recovery, he gained some weight, and when he returned, the same horse could no longer carry him. It was a perfect example of Blocker's quiet determination and grit. Though he rarely spoke about it, Blocker was a decorated Korean War veteran. The war had a lasting impact on him, especially when it came to guns. While Bonanza often involved shootouts, outlaws, and frontier justice, Blocker personally hated firearms. He said that while he had to carry a gun on television, he wanted nothing to do with them in real life. His fear and dislike of guns began one terrifying night in Korea, sitting on a mountain and realizing how powerless a person becomes when someone else has a weapon. That moment shattered any sense of invincibility he once had. Before the war, he had enjoyed hunting. But afterward, he owned no guns, and didn't allow his sons to hunt either. To him, shooting animals for sport made no sense. Unless the animals could shoot back, he believed calling it a sport was dishonest. His feelings on the matter were firm, thoughtful, and deeply personal. This created an interesting contrast. On screen, Hoss sometimes reached for his gun, but off-screen, the man playing him rejected violence entirely. On the Bonanza set, Blocker found something rare in Hollywood: a real family. He became especially close to Lauren Green and Michael Landon. In the early days of the show, while Blocker was still exploring Hoss, Landon, still young, already had strong opinions about storytelling and where the show should go. Despite fame and success, Blocker never forgot where he came from. So, did he come from? Why was his death tragic? Let's find out. Tragic end of Dan Blocker and his wife. Dan Blocker moved his parents to California so they could be closer. But his hometown of O'Donnell, Texas, never stopped feeling proud of him. People there remembered the quiet, bookish boy who always seemed lost in a story. To them, it felt almost unreal to see that same boy riding across the Ponderosa every Sunday night, smiling into millions of living rooms. By the mid-1960s, Dan had reached a level of success most actors only dream about. Fans loved him, colleagues respected him, and children looked up to Hoss Cartwright as someone to aspire to. But in a twist of irony, Dan didn't care much for fame. He loved acting, performing, and the craft itself. But being recognized and idolized made him uncomfortable. Dan and his wife, Dolphia Parker, chose a quiet life. While other stars bought grand estates in Beverly Hills and hosted flashy parties, they settled in a simple 4-bedroom, 3-bath home in Northridge, about 20 miles from Paramount Studios. For Dan, acting was a job, not a path to stardom. Fame brought attention he didn't always enjoy. Strangers would stop him in the streets, grab his arm, or ask for autographs. He valued privacy and personal space, and losing it was hard. In a remarkable move, Dan relocated his family to Lugano, Switzerland. This wasn't for business or taxes, but for something simple and poetic, a love of quiet and beauty. Inspired by a National Geographic feature on the lakes of northern Italy and southern Switzerland, he knew he wanted to return. In 1970, the family explored the region, Lake Como, Lake Maggiore, and finally, Lugano. The town felt right. It offered peace, privacy, and a slower pace. The children attended an American school, learned new languages, and Europe became their backyard. Unlike many celebrities, Dan disliked premieres, headlines, and Hollywood socializing. He wanted a real life. In Lugano, he found it. He could be a husband, a father, and a private citizen, watching his children grow without cameras or crowds. The distance mattered because, while millions saw him as a cowboy, he was quietly choosing a different identity. A loving husband, a father wanting normalcy for his kids, and a man seeking peace. Tragically, this quiet life ended too soon. In 1972, while preparing for the final season of Bonanza, Dan felt unusually weak. Tests revealed he needed gallbladder surgery, a routine procedure. But hours after returning home, he became dizzy and suffered severe pain. Rushed back to the hospital, he never came out. Dan Blocker passed away from a pulmonary embolism at just 43. The loss was devastating. His wife, Dolphia Parker Blocker, passed away on October 14, 2018, at the age of 89. However, they left a legacy built on strong family bonds and a calm, lasting impact. But how was his early beginning? Could he be considered humble and grounded? Let's find out. Dan Blocker's early life. Dan Blocker entered the world already larger than life. He was born on December 10, 1928, in Dalby, Texas, and from the very beginning, people could see he was no ordinary baby. He weighed an astonishing 14 pounds at birth. Even today, he still holds the record as the largest baby ever born in Bowie County, Texas. In many ways, his life began as a story that people loved to repeat, and that sense of amazement followed him everywhere he went. When Dan was still a young boy, his parents, Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona Blocker, moved the family to the tiny town of O'Donnell, about 40 miles south of Lubbock. Life had not been easy for them. Dan's father had once worked as a farmer, but during the terrible years of the Great Depression, he lost everything he owned. Refusing to give up, he gathered what little money he had left and opened a small grocery store. The family lived in a few simple rooms behind that store. From a young age, Dan helped out whenever he could. Because he was already much bigger than most boys his age, he often carried heavy bags of groceries to customers' cars. His father liked to joke with friends that maybe he should actually pay other people to hire Dan, because the big boy kept accidentally breaking things around the shop. Shelves, boxes, and even counters sometimes suffered from his enormous strength. O'Donnell itself was incredibly small, with a population of only about 800 people, surrounded by wide stretches of ranch land and open sky. In a town that quiet, people had to create their own excitement. Saturday nights became the biggest event of the week, and strangely enough, the entertainment often centered around Dan. Word began to spread that if anyone wanted to test their strength, the giant young man would be there waiting. People would rope off part of Main Street, and Dan would face anyone brave enough to challenge him. According to Dan himself, he never lost a single fight. Even as a teenager, he weighed around 275 pounds, and he understood very well how strong he was. His confidence was enormous. At one point, he even joked that if he had a few months to train and lose a little weight, he could probably defeat heavyweight boxing champion Floyd Patterson. But his strength was not just something he talked about. It showed in everything he did. At 13 years old, Dan joined the Texas Military Institute, where he played linebacker on the football team. He was powerful, fast for his size, and incredibly difficult to stop. His talent on the field earned him a scholarship to Sul Ross State University, where he planned to study English while continuing to play football. By the time he turned 18, Dan stood about 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed close to 300 pounds. And over the years, he would grow even bigger and more imposing. Yet the moment that truly changed his life came from a completely unexpected place. One day, the university's drama club needed someone strong enough to move heavy dummy props for a production of the play Arsenic and Old Lace. Dan was the perfect person for the job. At first, he was only supposed to help behind the scenes. Then, someone had an idea. Why not let the giant football player step onto the stage for a small role? They cast him as Teddy Brewster, the eccentric nephew of the play's murderous aunts. That single moment under the stage lights changed everything. The laughter of the audience, the energy in the theater, and the strange excitement of performing in front of a crowd completely captured him. For the first time in his life, Dan realized that acting might be his true calling. Soon after, he made a bold decision. He switched his major from English to theater, and he never looked back. After graduating, Dan surprised many people by turning down offers to play professional football. Instead, he traveled east to chase a dream he had only recently discovered. He worked in summer stock theaters and repertory companies, slowly learning the craft of acting and gaining experience on stage. Eventually, his hard work paid off when he landed a small role on Broadway in King Lear by William Shakespeare. So, what do you think about the tragic end of Dan Blocker and his wife? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.